it is something I embed in my regular practice. So it's about taking kids out of the situation, sitting down and talking to them. It's about putting their mental health above their academics. And when I was a principal, that was one thing that I actually was quite proud of saying to people is the children's happiness and mental health is actually more important to me than their academics.
Here we go. Hello and welcome to the Focusing Way podcast. I'm your host, Davide Battistella. Find The Focusing Way on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and our website, thefocusingway.com. Today on the Focusing Way podcast is special needs education and behavior consultant Gianna Colizza. She's worked extensively with children and their families, is an active participant in government panels, and is an advocate for parents. Gianna has traveled to Europe, learning about best practices in special education, and led the establishment and operation of a private special education school in London, in the UK. She's also worked closely on projects with the renowned Simon Baron-Cohen, and has been interviewed by The Economist and Sen magazines. And joining me now on the Focusing Way podcast, Gianna Colizza. Gianna, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Gianna, maybe we could just start off and you could let me know or let our audience know how you work with autistic children. What's a situation that you're confronted with?
Parents come to me when they've gotten a new diagnosis possibly for their child, and I work with them to help them understand the diagnosis, know some first places that they can turn, what kind of the next steps are going to be. Because oftentimes parents tell me that they get this diagnosis and they feel that they have nowhere to turn or they don't know where to start. So I like to be that starting point with them. Another area that I support is education. So parents often come to me and let me know if they're struggling with their child, specifically academically, which I look to support with, or with the school, and looking at school advocacy and feeling as though their children aren't getting the education that should be provided, or they're just not quite sure of what things could be in place to help their children. And we work together to put those things in place. Parents also reach out to me with behavioral challenges that they're facing at home and wanting to understand their children better and maybe get some practical strategies that they can use to support their family as a whole and their child, and just understand their child a little bit better and differently. I have a lot of children and teenagers who come to me struggling with anxiety, and we sit and we do coaching through that. And the way I tend to work is doing about half an hour with the child, if they're able, and then 15 minutes with the parents, because I feel that that family dynamic is really important. So I work often with the whole family.
And can you just tell me a little bit about what you've seen and what you've experienced on the front lines working with children all these years?
I think that's a very important topic, and one that we don't often consider as much as we should. I feel that children nowadays do tend to have quite a bit more pressure and anxieties than we've seen in the past for various different reasons. I work with children specifically with mostly autism and ADHD who struggle quite a bit with anxiety, which often comes out in behavior. It's the one thing that I would say is probably the most consistent with those types of disabilities and challenges is the underlying anxieties, which come out in a lot of different ways. You can see them in the classroom as often being the disruptive kids, the opposite, the quiet kids, and just the children that are really struggling to focus and reach their full potential. Because you think about adults in the way that they how we react if we have, our first job interview and we find that we stumble on questions or we ask ourselves, oh, why did I say that? And you're just not in your same frame of mind when you have this anxiety and worry following you around all the time. So often these kids are carrying that around, but they don't know how to communicate it the same way we may or may not, because even as adults, that can be a challenge. But there's such a misinterpretation of their behaviors and why they're acting the way that they are. And I think that it's important as educators to stop and take the time and figure out why kids are acting the way they are, rather than just hitting those behaviors head on and asking ourselves the questions, even with the quiet kids, are you sure they're okay? Are you sure that everything is going on, instead of thinking, great, they're quiet in the corner, so we can kind of let them be, and really taking mental health as a priority within the classroom.
What's your sort of mantra when it comes to education?
I had a quote that I read when I years ago, maybe about 15 years ago, and I'm not even sure who said it. So it's always down as unknown, but I find that it really speaks true to my views and my my strong beliefs on education and children in general. And it's a a child's perspective of the world is different from yours. Try to understand a child's perspective before you expect them to master yours.
I want to ask you about that and why early in your career or throughout your career, why is putting a child's mental well being first so important to you?
Yeah, there's a couple reasons. I've been somebody who I was challenging with my behavior in primary school, and secondary school, and I often felt very I wouldn't say disliked, but I feel like I had a lot of teachers that really didn't enjoy their jobs, and they kind of came in to teach, and they didn't have that love for the kids. I had the few that did, and the few that did I still remember, and I was an angel in their class. But it always made me curious to wonder why teachers would get into something that they didn't enjoy, and how it affected us. And there was a personal experience of mine when I was in high school, and I was being that class clown and acting out, where all the teachers would get all riled up and it would turn into a big argument. And kids get a kick out of that when they're young, so didn't always stop the behavior. And sometimes it was incredible how quickly you could get them riled up. But one time I did that in a class with a teacher that I'll never forget. I was in high school, science class, actually, which was never my strongest topic either. And I was being, misbehaving a bit in class. And she had said to me, Jenna, I'm going to talk to you after class, okay? And I was like, okay, whatever, kind of trotted along, got on with I think I was about 15 at the time, 15-year-old attitude. And I went and saw her after class, so, slouching my way in, dropped myself on the chair, what? So, and her response was not what I expected. I expected to get the typical lecture and, being told off. And she said to me, is everything okay with you? I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, well, you just, you're acting out a bit in class today. I'm just wondering if you're okay, like if there's something else going on. And suddenly I perked up and sat up and was like, well, and when I named off some like typical, like nothing major, but typical 15-year-old problems. And she kind of sat with me in an appropriate way and kind of comforted me with some of those things, and just said, like, I'd really appreciate it if, I'm happy to be here to teach you, and I'd like you to be happy to be here to learn. And I was just absolutely shocked by her approach to that. And from that day forward, I got all 90s in her class, even though I wasn't great in science. And I kept a really close relationship with her throughout high school. And it was kind of that idea of knowing that somebody in this educational system cared. And even though it was one teacher at that point, it made a huge difference. And that approach just always sat with me. And that was one of my personal experiences, right? I saw going the extra mile and caring can make a big difference.
So, that effect of somebody just taking the time to listen to you or even ask you what was going on with you had this kind of profound impact. And I wonder if that you could take that or tell me a little bit about how that led to the core values to creating the kind of situations you've created where special needs children can excel in their education environment.
Well, it's really interesting because I look back at it now, and even just reflecting on this interview and the way she handled me is a lot of the same strategies that I use now with the kids. And I actually never took the time to sit and think about where I developed such strong passion and feelings towards dealing with children who are challenging with these, have challenges with behavior. So it's interesting to me now to reflect on how profound that moment was for me, that now it is something I embed in my regular practice. So it's about taking kids out of the situation, sitting down and talking to them. It's about putting their mental health above their academics. And when I was a principal, that was one thing that I actually was quite proud of saying to people is the children's happiness and mental health is actually more important to me than their academics. You'd have some principals would be like, you can't say that. Like, academics is school.
Mm.
And for me, I said, well, happy kids learn. And if they're happy, you're going to see them flourish more than kids who are highly anxious and stressed and unhappy. They're not going to reach their fullest potential. So I personally feel that putting their happiness first is priority. And it was a really successful system to put in place. So looking at therapy being embedded within the curriculum, um, training teachers in my training, which is behaviors communication, which we can get into afterwards. But it's quite self-explanatory. Um, well-being of the people around the kids, and recognizing anxiety in kids is something that really helped the academics succeed in the educational environment.
I just want to circle back on one thing you said there, and that was taking the child aside. And just talk to me about how important that moment actually is from the teacher perspective, the child perspective, and the kinds of things that you avoid as an educator, as a teacher, when you actually pause and take the moment to remove, like, to diffuse the situation by creating a new situation. Can you just describe what your approach is when you have to deal with a situation in a problem situation in a classroom?
Yeah, in a classroom, and this is also some of the strategies I gave parents as well. And a big part of it comes back to respecting the child. And a lot of people think, or I get the feedback of, "Oh, I'm not trying to be the kid's best friend or the child's best friend." And I said that that's not what respect is. Respect is thinking about what that child is going through at that point and respecting what they need as well as what we want. So for me, a big thing is removing the child from the situation. So I don't tell kids off in front of a classroom full of kids. I wouldn't do it at the dinner table. I would say, right, we're going to go talk. Let's go out to the hallway, for example. And even the connection of if they're willing to hold your hand and walk out to the hallway to start off that level of trust. If I'm not happy with you, I'm not going to deny that, but I'm still here and I'm still the adult who's in control. I can be unhappy with something that you've done. Doesn't mean I'm unhappy with you as a person. And then so taking them out, sitting them down, and then I'm a huge advocate on getting down to the child's level. So you'll often see me if I'm having a discussion with a child who's having a difficult time. Is I'll be kneeling down, kind of eye level with the child, because it's intimidating if you're coming down and then someone's looking down at you and telling you off. You're fighting that power already. The child's feeling intimidated. So for me, it's very much for this most simple, practical strategies is removing them, respecting the fact that not everybody else needs to hear and see what's going on with this child. No one would want that. No one would be told off at work in front of all their coworkers. Getting down to their level and then being very firm and consistent in what I'm saying. So it's not a lot of negotiating or a lot of uncertainty from me. And you have to think about what's coming out of your mouth because you have to be sure that you can be sure about it. But just showing the child that you are in control and reminding them that you're angry with what they've done. I think that's a big thing. I have significant memories throughout elementary school and high school of thinking teachers hated me.
Mm.
And when a child feels like someone doesn't like them or an adult doesn't like them, they're generally quite often their response is, well, now I'm going to do stuff to make sure you don't like me because I already know you don't like me. So I'm going to protect myself and give you a reason not to like me. So kind of that reminding them of, I'm really unhappy with this. And then trying to bring empathy in is always good. A lot of people think that autistic children or children in general struggle with empathy. Some do, but that's definitely not a generalized characteristic of autism whatsoever. So sort of sitting down and thinking about how that makes somebody else feel, or just giving them the straight consequence of this is a consequence of your actions.
Mm.
I think kids get a lot of adults try to negotiate or try to make them feel better or distract them from how they're feeling, um, which I mean is a whole other question. But
Mm.
distraction from emotions is something else that I find that we do unintentionally, but is quite detrimental to their well-being.
I just want to go to that subtle difference between being in control and being controlling. And tell me a little bit about the difference of that, of like, that, where you're not actually trying to, you're in control of the situation. You're not being controlling of the child. Can you just expand on that a bit?
Absolutely, and that's a fantastic point. That kind of goes into the idea that I was saying with the emotions. Even is that a child has the right to feel however they need to feel. What they do with those feelings is not always appropriate, and it might need some sort of guidance or some sort of rules around what they do with those emotions. But it's about teaching the child their own consequences. So it's not just a matter of something you're going to take away or something that you're going to do. It's also what their consequences bring into the equation, and respecting their emotions. So the child's emotions shouldn't be controlled. And I feel like as adults, we do that a lot. Oh, my child is sad. Let's distract them or make them laugh or talk about something else. Or, I mean, I see, parents and educators doing cartwheels to try to distract a child if they're feeling a negative emotion. And I think it's very important not to try to control those emotions, that they need to learn what to do with them. So if a child's really sad and they're crying, even though it may be hard for parents sometimes, I understand, but put them over on the couch and say, "You're sad right now. Be sad. When you're ready to talk, I'm here." And then work out together what they do with that sadness. So it's not stop crying. Don't do that. Like, and we say it so often, like even just coming out of my mouth, like how often do you hear parents tell them, stop crying, or, oh, they're really angry, put their favorite TV show on, it'll distract them. And they don't have that opportunity to sit with their feelings and realize that their feelings are a part or something that they are feeling. It's not who they are. It's not that they are that entire feeling. So you're feeling anger right now. You're not necessarily angry about everything that's going on, but this one thing has made you feel angry. Think about it. Come back to me and let's see what we can do with that anger. And I mean, I've done it. So I know it sounds challenging. I've had kids hitting me. I've had them, being quite physical, and I will pick them up, sit them down and say, do you know what? You need to be angry over that. I won't let you hit me. So those boundaries are still in place, but be angry. And I think that's a big thing about not controlling kids' emotions. And then their emotional intelligence is far more progressed when they become teenagers, rather than a lot of kids who realize when they come into teenagehood that someone has gotten rid of all these feelings for them before, and they can't do that forever. So now it's, what do I do with all these emotions that I'm feeling? And it can go into crisis because they don't know, they don't have that emotional intelligence.
A lot of what we've been talking about has been one-on-one situations that parents, I'm sure, who are listening totally recognize, the educators who are listening totally recognize. But you had to put a strategy together to create a school and be a principal at a school in London in the UK. And that school had some tremendous success. I mean, it had early success and it was in the top 3% for schools with children with special needs in the UK. How did you get this through to the staff and to the culture of what you were creating to create that kind of success?
I think anything that is that, how fortunately we were successful within our approach to the school. It was very much a team approach. There were a lot of people involved in that development, and there were years that went into it even before I became a part of it. Um, and it's a culture. It's a culture that you have to develop within people. It's training, it's hiring the right people, people who have the same passion that you do, the same views on child behavior. And I've always said that's one of the benefits of working in a special needs school. Because in the UK, obviously, it's far more um, prevalent to have special needs schools than in Canada. And when I'm working in them, you tend to be surrounded by pretty good people. Like they've chosen to work with these kids. Sometimes in mainstream schools, kid or teachers end up working with kids with special needs, but they didn't sign up for that. So they have more of a difficult time with these kids, whereas most of the people within the special needs schools or special needs environment, bubbles, whatever you want to call it, they're there for a reason. So I've met some of the most incredible therapists and teachers and teaching assistants that I've always said there's certain things you can't teach. Patience, empathy, work ethic. So I'd have some staff come to me who had zero experience with special needs kids, none, but their personality was bang on. And I'm like, I can teach you about autism. I can teach you about ADHD. I can teach you about dyslexia. I can teach you about whatever. That stuff is teachable, but you as a person, and the reasons you want to be part of this school um, are clear. And then that was within all the places that I led,
Mm.
and my recruitment kind of tactic. I was very much put the book down, let's sit and have a chat. I want to see what type of person you are. So I think that the CV isn't always telling. And I think that's where we get it wrong a lot, is you get a CV that you think looks amazing. So you hire the person and their personality stinks
Mm.
and they can't cope with the kids and they struggle with the kids. Whereas some people, CVs might be a little bit more empty, but their passion's there. I've had family members of come in and say, my cousin had autism and had no friends until they were 10 years old. And I don't want other kids to be that way. My brother, has a really difficult time and has become very depressed over his social interactions. So I want to help. So if they come in with those stories and those burning desires to help these kids, chances are you can teach them the rest, and then you end up with a pretty solid team around you, and you build that culture with a similar thought process.
Why do you see behavior as communication?
I will put my name down on it and sign it, that I believe that in every situation with kids, behavior is always communication. I don't believe in bad kids or naughty kids or whatever word you want to use. Kids want to be loved instinctively. And yes, I know there's different challenges and different mental illnesses and things that can come into play, but overall, kids are kids. And I mean, people are people, but since we're talking about kids, um, behavior always is some sort of, they're trying to communicate something and they're doing it through their behavior. So I've never taken a head-on approach with these kids. Since I was 14, I've been working with kids with challenging behavior. I always gravitated towards them because I felt that they were very misunderstood. um, so I never had the whole, I'm very authoritative, but I didn't have that head on, I just want the behavior to stop, because I just realized that just doesn't work. People tried that with me throughout my entire school career, and the more they hit me on with it, the more I was disruptive. Whereas if you stop for a minute and kind of go around the back door and think, okay, I want to see from behind, why is this happening? What's going on here? What is this child trying to get through to the adults around them? And that approach has just always been so successful for me. So I follow that dearly. That behavior is communication, and is our responsibility as adults to take the time to see what those reasons are for our kids.
But how does approaching the situation differently, as you described it, by recognizing the person, how, from your experience, how has that changed the whole educational experience of that child? You must have been witness to some of these amazing transformations. Can you share some of that?
Yeah, and we look at, if you're in a job day to day where your job doesn't, your boss doesn't like you feel like you're getting paid a quarter of the salary you should be. You're in an environment that's uncomfortable, that's overly stimulating, and you think about how much you'd succeed. Let's pretend you're working in an office that is tiny with no windows, with music blaring, with a boss coming in and yelling at you all the time, working as hard as you can, always being told you're not working hard enough. And like, how happy would we be? But we have the choice to walk away. Kids don't have that choice. You're going to school because you're 7, and that's what 7-year-olds do. So go and deal with it. And I feel like in human nature, if we feel safe is the biggest thing. Safe, taken care of, and like the people that are meant to be in control are in control, that our anxiety levels can come down, our brains can slow down, and which is a challenge with autism and ADHD specifically. And we can really take in what we're meant to be learning, and everybody's going to succeed better in a situation where they're enjoying it. And education can be enjoyable, can be fun. It can be a lot of things that isn't the mundane, day to day, boring, unstimulating classroom environment, which, I mean, I think the younger teachers are really coming in with this new energy and attitude, but very different from when I was young. And I just feel like school is a huge part of their life. It's, 7 hours, 6, 7 hours a day, every day. And I always say you get one chance at a childhood. You can't go back to being a child. And that is such a huge responsibility for us as adults to be looking at and thinking they need to enjoy their childhood. School shouldn't be something they get. I used to work with one little boy whose mom had called me really distraught of our little boy. He was only 4 years old, going to kindergarten in the UK. And the second he saw his school, he'd sit on the ground, he'd break out in hives from head to toe. She's like, that's how much school stressed him out. He had a physical response to school. And in the UK, you have to bring your kids to school, otherwise you can be fined. So you can't just take your kids home whenever you feel like it. So she's like, I, as a mother, had to go and put him in this situation at a 4 years old, from 8 o'clock in the morning till 3 o'clock in the afternoon, day after day. And she had to fight and fight and fight to get him put in an appropriate school, which is one of the first schools I ran in the UK. And she just said that difference in my child and our whole family unit, for me as a mother, not having to drop him off, then be sick to my stomach all day at work, the grandparents having to listen to me complain to them, him coming home, me being stressed, him being stressed, to know that my child's going to school where he's being loved, looked after, and his needs are being attained to, because we were all happier people. It wasn't just my son, because you changed our entire family's life. And to this day, she's still very appreciative, and so are the grandparents, of that change of school and change of environment has changed their whole lives, because he's happier. We all strive to be happier, but I feel the only difference is, as educators and parents, we have a responsibility to find ways to make our kids happier.
A lot of what you're describing is kind of a collaborative approach rather than authoritarian. But that's kind of a slippery slope, because you still have to have boundaries, and you still have to run a classroom, and you still have to educate a specific number of people in a prescribed amount of time. There are benchmarks that you want to reach and goals you want to achieve for these children. Talk to me a bit about that line between, authority and collaboration, and the boundaries that the environment you want to set up for these children.
Of course. I come off very authoritative, and I'm huge on boundaries. So I believe in the collaborative approach to look at different perspectives, because I never find that one adult knows all the answers ever. It's always best to get other perspectives and see, speech and language therapist is going to explain something to me that an occupational therapist, and we look at the child from a whole perspective. So their sensory needs, their speech and language needs, their mental health needs, and look at everything to build the best program for them. But yes, of course, within the classroom, or even at home when you have multiple kids running around, is how to put those things in practically. And it comes a lot to, I often call it love and boundaries, because I think there's a big misunderstanding with boundaries, as boundaries being, sounds pretty, but when people try to put it into place, it's harsh and it's mean, but my child has special needs. What if they don't understand? And what if they don't get it? And it's coming from a genuine place, especially from parents or educators who haven't been trained in special needs. They feel bad. Oh, but they have a disability. I don't want to be mean to them. And that's a big, big, big misunderstanding, because boundaries and predictability are two things that really calm these kids down, all kids, but especially kids on the spectrum and with ADHD, is they need to know when they do something, if it's right or wrong. I mean, that's why we're here. And it's not, changing your language is huge. Shall we do our math work now? That's a polite thing to say that you might say to each other. Okay, the kid says no. Well, you have to. Well, you asked me. And so no, I don't want to. So now you turned into this power battle. Or if it's just that confident language of, right, we're doing our math work now, sit down. And it seems simple, but if you go into a classroom and listen to a lot of educators or parents, you don't see how polite their language is naturally, but which always leaves open-ended responses. So, can we all come and wash our hands, please? Nah, I can't right now, I'm playing. Whereas let's wash our hands now. Like it's a subtle change, but it makes a big impact. And then just the boundaries of no is no, and consistency. And that idea that they know that when they come to the parent and ask something, they're going to get the same response because there's a reason for it. So no, you can't play outside on the sidewalk when mommy's not there because there are cars there and that's not safe. Okay, so I kind of understand that logic. But then if I keep bugging you and eventually you say, okay, fine, go out for 10 minutes. Now they don't know what's safe and what's not. And this is something very natural that happens within the home and school environment. And they think, okay, fine, whatever. They've been asking for so long, just go. But then it gives that confused response. Okay, was it safe or not? Well, now I don't know. So now I'm going to keep pushing boundaries. And then the more nervous they're feeling, the more they push the boundaries. If I'm not feeling safe, so I want to push and see if someone's in control. So their behavior becomes more and more challenging. Whereas if it is just, those answers are the answers that you've said the first time and you stick to them, they know that they can't go anywhere. And that's where I used to have a lot of success with my kids meaning my students, is they knew that when they came to me, they knew I adored them. That was important. But no was no. I would walk in the classroom, and if kids are misbehaving, they would just stop, because they knew that the consequence was going to be there. And then I don't get angry with things. I think that's a big difference, is I don't wait until I'm angry and then blow up. I come in with a strong, firm approach. I may raise my voice, but I'm in complete control. I'm not actually angry at the time. And that's key as well. It's not allowing yourself to get out of control. If you've emotionally come out of yourself and you've gotten angry, which is difficult as a parent, because I see why that happens more often. It's about taking that time, taking a step back, waiting until you can approach a situation calmly, and then coming back and working it out with the child in a firm way. And then I would say the other key point would be environment. So environment's huge about, sensory overload and everything that's going on in the classroom, and just giving a child who's struggling with these things a space that's calm, quieter, and that they can access when they need to is a big help. So environment, your consistency in what you're saying, and the firmness in what you're saying, and ensuring that you're not angry, I think are some really big key points that seem simple and that they may not make that big of an impact. I promise you they really do. And they're things that everybody can do in the classroom environment or the home environment.
So you've just talked a bit about that experience, and I just want to remind people that you're doing this in a not like a kind of regular scholastic environment, but with children with special needs, autism, ADD, ADHD. What kind of extra challenges does that bring?
That's an interesting one, because I quite often get from parents, and this is a question I get from every single parent, I think, that I've worked with, is if I put my child in a classroom with other kids with special needs, are they not just they don't have role models. They're going to stay with their challenges or have more challenges. And I think the benefit of it, one of the main benefits of it from a child's perspective, is that they don't feel weird and like the odd ones out most of the time, because they actually have some sort of relief of looking at other kids and thinking, oh, there are other people like me.
Mm.
It's nice for everybody to have people they can relate to. We all like having people we can relate to and realize that we're not the only ones feeling a certain way. And on the challenges sides of things as well is, I don't really like it. Comparing the mainstream and the special needs classroom, there's a lot more advantages within the classroom of having all kids with challenges than there are disadvantages. But I guess it's hard to find the staffing. You need very high staffing, so it's expensive. That would be one of the biggest challenges. And having knowledgeable staff involved. So having a therapy team close by, which a lot of schools now tend to have access to. And then just ensuring that you have good people involved. Because in the public system, that can be a little bit more challenging on the therapist side of things.
Tell me about your concept of forgotten children.
For me, forgotten children are the ones that are in the middle. So they don't go into a typical special needs school with quite obvious disabilities, but they're also not coping in mainstream environments, and they're struggling with their mental health. And I think there's this middle ground for kids who have things such as we've spoken quite a bit about with the autism and higher end of the spectrum of autism, where they just kind of have to cope, and they have a lot of what they call invisible disabilities. So if you looked at them or saw them, you wouldn't know. So people don't always approach them with that sensitivity or that knowledge base. So they quite often come out as the children with really challenging behavior, or they're the really recluse and quiet ones who just sort of get ignored. And because they're in this middle, and nobody likes the middle ground in anything, because they're in this middle ground, we're really missing the key times and spots to be supporting them and giving the help that they need.
Mental well being, mental health is very much talked about these days. And I'm sure as an educator, it's come up more and more as the years have has gone on. But will you tell me that story about one of the first children you worked with, and an experience that sort of shaped your future going forward and the kind of approach you would have to educating?
Yeah, this is another story that stuck with me forever, and I still have a hard time telling it without tearing up. And it's interesting now looking back at my experience, I see how much they link up. But was fresh out of university, out of getting my Bachelor of Education. So I was quite young. I was in my early to mid 20s, and I got called into secondary school. And as per usual, I always ended up in the resource class, which is where all the kids with behavioral challenges would go. I'd naturally end up in these places. Nobody else wanted to do it, and I always jumped on the opportunity to do it. So I'm sitting in this room with a few teenagers sitting and doing their work because they're on detention. And I had one student come in who came into the classroom walking down the lane between desks, just flipping desks, swearing, yelling. Nothing towards me, just flipping the desk and was just obviously angry. So I waited a second and let him flip the last desk. He was getting close to the end of the lane anyway. And then I just stopped and calmly said, "You okay?" And I got some, yelling at me and swearing at me. "Oh, you wouldn't care anyways." I said, "Well, you don't really know me. So you can't say that necessarily. But let me have a go." And I walked closer to him. And I find proximity is a big thing, especially with little kids. That when they start wailing and having a difficult time, people often stand back. And I never stand back. I stand closer to show them I'm here,
Mm.
and you're not scaring me. I'm here with you. So interestingly, in that situation, the same thing. I walked closer to him and said, I mean, what's going on? You're clearly angry. Why are you angry? You wouldn't care. You wouldn't this. Go away. Well, I'm not going to go away because you're in my classroom, but I will talk to you. So he slams his books down on one of the desks he didn't flip over, and he's like, "Well, it's my homework. It's my teacher. My teacher's a jerk." And I don't think he used jerk, but I'll use that for the podcast.
Mm.
I said, "Well, why is your teacher a jerk?" "Well, last night I spent all night studying and doing my homework, and I worked really hard on it. And then today in class, when they asked me a question, I got it wrong. And my teacher said in front of the class, um, well, maybe if you did your work and you did your homework, you were meant to, you'd know the answer to the question." And that made me a little break in my heart when I heard that. And I had to remind myself I had to be professional. I'm still fresh out of university and young and tempered as I am. And I just said, "Well, yeah, I could see how you'd think the teacher is a jerk." And he sort of looked at me. I said, "Well, I mean, I wouldn't have dealt with it that way. I don't think that was the right way to deal with it either." And in my head, I'm thinking, "I don't know if you should be saying this. You're just a supply teacher at this school." But I did. So that kind of caught his attention. And I said, "Well, why don't you just show me the math questions and let's see if we can go through it and see what's happened." So he puts his book down, his binder down, and he starts flipping through the pages. And I'm standing beside him or sitting beside him. And I see really dark graphics and drawings and quite concerning type words and things as he's flipping by quickly. I decided that was not the time or the place to bring that up. So we went over the math, and I just asked him again, like, is everything okay? And he's just like, "Well, I'm, mad about this and whatever." But, his attention was over. So I let him go. And then I'm quite nosy and, like to get involved in things. So I decide, being a supply teacher at the school for the second day, to go down to the guidance counselor's office. I walk into this guidance counselor's office. She has a chandelier, this expensive rug in her room, things you don't see in a public school. I'm like, okay, so this would be interesting. So I went in and said, "So there's this child." And I named him and said, "Have you had the chance to speak to him? Like, I'm just a little bit concerned." She goes, "Oh, well, yeah, he came by the office a couple of times. He's on my list. I got to see him at some point, but I just haven't had the time." And here I am thinking in my head, we have a 17-year-old kid who's trying to talk to you, who's a boy that you're ignoring. Okay. So, well, can you, maybe find the time to talk to him? Do a little less shopping for your office and find the time to talk to the child? "Oh, yeah, yeah. I'll put it on. I'll put it on my list." And I got called back to that school, and I asked that boy. I saw him in the hallway. "Did you go and speak to that guidance counselor?" He's like, "I tried. Like, I've given up." And then I got enraged. Like, I went down to the guidance counselor office. I think I actually raised my own voice and just said, "You need to see this kid today. And I'm telling you that now. I was here 2 days ago, and you said you were going to make time to see him, and you haven't. And then I kind of explained what I'd seen, and I gave her a straight picture. I'm like, I'll say something if this kid isn't seen. I was livid. Um, so then next I hear on the PA system that he gets called down to the guidance counselor's office. So then I'm like, okay, I feel like my job's done in that sense. Someone's looking after him. And I left and I got called back to the school like a month later. Somehow they still wanted me back. And I was walking down the hallway and I saw that boy. And he came up and he's like, Miss Colizza. I said, oh, yeah, hi. How's it going? He's like, I just have to tell you that I know what you did for me. And if you didn't do it, I don't think I'd still be here. And I can't thank you enough for what you've done. And that just hit me in a sense of, if I responded to that situation, how we typically respond to that situation is, you don't flip desks, you don't swear at the teacher, you're in so much trouble, you're suspended, which is how we would typically deal with that. Or we just let the guidance counselor sit and go shopping every day, not take care of her kids like she's supposed to, and not had that voice to speak up for him. He may not be here. And like, I'll never forget the look in his face. I'll never forget that situation. That's, over, it's like 13 years ago now. And I still remember that. And that has allowed me the ability to stay calm in every situation, no matter how challenging the kid is. Because in my mind, they're hurting. So I can't possibly be angry. Yeah, I'm not happy if they're hitting me. I'm not like, oh, this is great. I'm human. But the ability to stay calm and think this isn't about me. And we need to stop making kids' behavior about us. Because it's not. It's about them. And yeah, that really fed into what I think the biggest things that made me realize the power we have as educators to help these kids.
Mm,
That we do have the power and that
yeah.
we need to be using it.
Tell me about the gender differences and autism and what we're learning now.
What's becoming more obvious is that we've always thought that there have been far more males diagnosed with autism than females. And science is coming out now. There's been a lot more research being done into the masking of autistic characteristics and traits, and how females are far more able to mask these challenges than males are. You look at certain things, and this is even just from my own perspective. You look at the anxiety, as we've discussed, underneath autistic people, and that underlying concern. And when we're anxious, we want to control things. So a lot of the time, we look at how we control, and even things as simple as, a lot of girls, will dye their hair or put makeup on, or all these things that they feel like they can control something about themselves. It's a little bit harder for males to be able to do the same thing. Females scientifically are more empathetic than boys, so then they are more able to see how their behavior affects people around them. So then they have that ability also to try to control those behaviors for other people, where males struggle more with that. There's a lot of autism associated with anorexia, and bulimia. And it's a lot of really interesting science that's coming out around the aspect of there may be far more undiagnosed females in the world who are struggling than not. And, with having autism, kids are 28 times more likely to have suicidal behaviors. With ADHD, they're 10 times more likely to become depressed, especially on the higher functioning ends of things. I hate that term, but that's what it's called. The higher functioning end is they're more aware that they're different. And these things are becoming huge in depression and suicide. So looking at the depression rates in females and female suicides, and seeing how many of them may have actually been on the spectrum and undiagnosed. So they started talking about it in conferences in the UK. I think the first one I attended was about 3 years ago. And now they're really digging into it. So it'll be interesting to see what comes of it.
Well, I just want to close out by asking you about that kind of empowerment and being an empowered teacher, creating empowered students that feel that they're there to accomplish their day and their tasks and to learn. But also, how, and I'm sure a lot of parents are dying for me to ask this question, but how can parents, just in a very general way, in a first step kind of way, be empowered to support their kids in general?
A big thing that I try to explain to my parents is, I always say, you read the parenting books, you have other children, you have nieces and nephews. And you think you're going to have this child and I have parenting down pat. I have the ideas of what to do with them. And then you get a diagnosis. And then suddenly you feel stripped of everything. The parents just feel like everything's been ripped off and they have no idea how to be a parent anymore. And I think one of the biggest things to empower our parents, and I say to them often, is you are still their parent. You still know how to parent them. You still know your child better than anybody else. It's just having to take yourself out of your perspective and put yourself into their perspective of what it is that they could possibly be going through and relate it to your own situation and then react that way. So the parents have it in them. They are more than capable of taking care of their kids. Their kids are their kids first and they're autistic second. Like they're still their kids. There isn't one drawing of an autistic person and that's what they're going to be like. Their characteristics and their personalities are who they are. And then autism is a part of that, of course, because they are autistic, but they're all individuals. And parents are going to know those individual characteristics and uniqueness the best. And it's just about educating yourself enough that you feel confident on how to react to your kids, how much to push at school. I find a lot of parents feel like they don't have the right to tell educators what to do. And this is coming from an educator. You do have the right to fight for your kid and what your child deserves in school and what supports are meant to be put in place. I hear continuously there's a term IEP, which they have in the UK and here in Canada, which is an individualized education plan. And all the parents I talk to, I say, do your teachers use it now? Well, that's a child's right to have that plan looked at. So that you can't, I can't just tell them to use it, but you can. So giving them back that confidence to be able to fight for their kids, feel like they know enough to fight for them, and allow them to recognize that they do have the abilities and the powers to do it. And one small key point is your kids are also still kids. They're not just their disability. So kids are still going to have 2-year-old tantrums. They're still going to have all those different things that they have, and they can still have consequences. They can still be disciplined. They can still have all those things put in place, because the more you treat them like they're able, the more the children work towards those goals and things. So yeah, I think it's important for parents to realize that they do have the power, and sitting with them and giving them that confidence back.
I'm just going to come back to a point that you made very early on about a child's happiness. And as an educator, you put that before their academics. And I'm just going to ask you, from what you've seen and your experience, how does making children calm and happy affect their ability to learn?
Well, hugely in some senses. And I was working with kids that were permanently excluded from school. I had a child that was excluded from 3 schools, and the government said they couldn't return to school. And I had children who had their parents TAing for them, so the parent had to go to school with them. I had kids who were being suspended all the time, 5-year-olds that are autistic being suspended from school. So logistically, if they're not in school, they can't learn. So that's a big problem. And when these kids are put in the right environments, they flourished like crazy. Their academics went shot up, especially in the first few months once they got used to the environment that they were in. And when they were able to get their behavior under control, which meant getting their anxiety under control, which is making them feel safe, so many of them are so intelligent and they have so much to offer. And it was just being bogged down by an environment and adults who didn't understand them. So it impacts them tremendously, their ability to be in school, their ability to listen, their ability to care about school, care about learning, understand the benefits of learning, be motivated. Those are all things that happen within a happy child rather than one who's angry, scared, and anxious, which is just not a headspace to learn anything, in my opinion.
Tell me about where people can find you, get in touch with you, ask you more, or even have you assist them.
My website's up and running, so that's JannaColizza.com. It's probably the best place. So there's my emails on there. It's just info@JannaColizza.com. And I'm associated with a company in Ottawa in Canada called Emerging Minds, where they have a collective amount of therapists that are all working together, so I'm associated with them. But yeah, and I have Instagram and Facebook and all that other fun social media stuff that they can find me at. And I answer everywhere. DMs on Instagram or messages on Facebook or emails or messages on my website. I'm pretty easy to get in touch with. So please do. I'm here to help. And even if I'm just a place to turn when you're not really sure where to turn, I'll do my best to direct you in the right place. And I also work internationally because everything's video conferencing at the moment with COVID, and it tends to be working well. I am seeing clients. I have clients everywhere right now, actually, not just in Canada. So it's another important point.
Gianna, I want to take this moment to really thank you for your time, for bringing your wisdom and your experience to an issue that many people kind of suffer silently with, families. And I just really, really want to thank you for being on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Google Play Music, Spotify, and iHeart Radio. And visit our website at thefocusingway.com.